Wow, so we just got finished with studying one of the greatest events in history that's recorded in the Bible, and that's the Exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. So now we're going on to chapter 19. What do you think it's going to be about? Of course, it's going to be about Egypt. Because at the same time all this is going on, we need to study what was going on in Egypt. We already know a lot about the Pharaoh and what happened in Egypt, don't we? Just by studying the last chapter. But now we're going to study about Pharaoh Ramses II. Why the second? Because he was called the Great. And probably Egypt was at one of its greatest pinnacles of history and power during this time. The time Ramses I, we have to start with Ramses I. Actually, there probably were some Ramses before even the first one that we have recorded. But we have Ramses I in 1292 BC ruling. And his son, Seti I, had a son. And he named his son, what do you think? Ramses II. So all of these pharaohs, their names were kind of the same, aren't they? So when we say Ramses, they think, well, which Ramses do you think it is? Because there was Ramses before and Ramses after. But we do know that they were pharaohs of that time. Well, Ramses II we're going to talk about here in this chapter, which was considered the Great. And why was he considered the Great? Because of his military campaigns. Well, let's go back. He was the grandson of Ramses I, and he actually became a captain of the military when he was only 10 years old. How old are you? Can you imagine you being a captain of the army? Well, who knows? He probably had some help in that, I'm sure. Like, where are we going to go? Or what are we going to do? Or who are we going to attack? So he probably had some help, but he sure was learning a lot about the military, about conquering other nations. So, his father took him on these military campaigns, and then after that, he reigned 66 years. And there are many statues made to him. Possibly because he just wanted everyone to worship him. You see, in those days, they worshipped idols. And you'll see these great big statues of idols of different gods that they worshipped. And we have found that out about Egypt and how each one of the plagues were a plague on one of their idols. They had lots of idols. And then, Ramses just thought, well, let's make myself a statue and I'll be like godlike. And you know what God thought about that? He said, do not make any graven images to worship. Do not make them for people to worship. It was against God's laws. But they still did that, except, in Israel, they knew better. Because, of course, we have Moses in the 10 Commandments. The first commandment is, I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not make any strange idols before me. Or put any strange idols before me and worship them. So, that's what God didn't want a statue to himself. He just wanted us to worship him. And they did almost makes me cry when you think about Egypt and how away from God they became. And so this military leader, and you have in your book, well, who did he fight with? Who did Ramses fight with? Well, we know the whole story of the Israelites. And we have to try to figure out which Ramses this one was. But we know this Ramses just by all of the hieroglyphics and the different things that they wrote down in history about him, that he was fighting the Hittites. Okay, you guys remember the Hittites? We studied them. Remember Hattusilus? Was a famous ruler of the Hittites. They were pretty strong in their military, and they too worshipped idols. So we have these two idol worship countries fighting each other. And they fought each other in the army against army at Canaan and Lebanon and Kadesh. So we know we fought. And the Egyptians had great skill in conflict. They had great military leaders, and they knew how to fight, and they fought with chariots. They had chariots. Well, then the two countries, after a great victory of Ramses II, finally they made a peace treaty in 1258. It's probably one of the first written peace treaties in the history of the world. So who was the, if that's the question, where was the first peace treaty made, or who made it? We know it was the Egyptians, making it with the Hittites. So they declared a truce. I mean, they stopped fighting. They were fighting so long that they kind of got tired of fighting. And one of the reasons they got tired of fighting, because Ramses the Great married the Hittites' king's daughter. So it was all a family matter now. So they decided, we better make a truce here since I'm marrying your daughter. And now we are united. So they united and fought together. And they fought against the Libyans, as in your book. And the Libyans came and tried to rule the Nile Delta River, which was definitely Egyptian land. So the Egyptians depended on the Nile River. You know that? So Egypt during this time, when you think of 1292 BC, before Christ, that's a long time ago, we have this ancient culture that we know a lot about in Egypt. And we know a lot about Ramses the Great. He also had these great big building projects, but most of them were to these false gods. He did this temple of gods, which is in your book. It's called the Great Hall of Columns. It's the largest room with columns in the world, 134 huge columns. Some of them were like 69 feet high, some were 33 feet high, some were 44 feet high, 33 feet wide, I mean. They were huge, huge columns. You could see that today. A lot of them probably fallen down by now, but there they were. The room is still there, intact. It's 54,000 square feet room. Huge, huge, with all these columns. Kind of an idol worshiping place, though. And then Abu Simbel dedicated this whole thing to himself, another pharaoh. He had 4 statues 66 feet tall of himself. And then Ramses II's wife, Nefertari, he had many wives, but that was his favorite wife, I guess. And this was discovered in 1813, this statue in this temple that was made for memorial for Ramses II's wife. Nefertari is a pretty famous name because a lot of movies have been made up about her and her beauty and how beautiful she was and how the king loved her so much above all of his other wives, and why he made a memorial temple just for her. Well, as we go on too, we think of all the Ramses, and after there were at least 9 other Ramses. And in the Bible, in Exodus, we know there's Ramses in the Bible because the Bible talks about the land of the Ramses was Egypt. So we're not really sure where this all fits into the timeline of history, but we know during the Exodus there were Ramses ruling in Egypt. Probably Moses, when he grew up in one of the Ramses, with some of the Ramses there. Maybe when they were little boys. Who knows? So we end with the study of Egypt, ancient culture study. When you go back in history, everyone studies a little bit about Egypt because Egypt was so powerful during this time. But we know that Egypt fell, probably because they worshipped so many idols. Well, if you go to Egypt now, you can see the pyramids and there's a lot of poverty there. Egypt is not a powerful country anymore. In fact, Israel is way more powerful than Egypt could ever be. And Egypt right today, they have to go to Israel to get supplies. They're right on the border of Israel, but they're actually depend on Israel on a lot of things. Well, we end with some boast in chariots, some in horses. But what will we boast in? But we will boast in the name of the Lord, our God. Psalm 27. When we think of chariots, I think of the chariots in Egypt. And they boasted in their chariots. But it says, why boast in chariots or horses? Why boast in other things? Why boast in today? Why boast in airplanes and trains? And why boast in the internet and all these things when we can boast in the Lord? Isn't that a great way to end? So now we're going to go on from the land of Egypt onto some other ancient cultures.